The microphone felt heavier than it looked. That's the first thing I noticed when my husband Marcus stood up from his seat at table 1, reached for it with both hands, and turned to face 212 people who had just watched my parents walk out of my 40th birthday dinner like the building was on fire. The room was still processing it. You could feel it, that collective held breath, the way conversations dissolved mid-sentence, the way my aunt near the back put her wine glass down very slowly, like sudden movements might make things worse. The restaurant had been transformed all evening. Soft gold lighting, a floral arch my best friend had driven 4 hours to help set up, a playlist I had curated over 3 weeks because I wanted every song to feel like something. And now the chair where my mother had been sitting was pushed back at a careless angle, her half-eaten plate of salmon still there, her folded napkin dropped on the floor like punctuation. Marcus didn't smile for the room. He didn't clear his throat or make a joke to cut the tension. He just stood there for 1 full second, steady the way he always is when something is actually serious, and said, "Before we get to the speeches, there's something I think everyone here should understand." My hands were clasped in my lap so tightly my rings left marks in my skin. "I'm Claire. I'm 39 years old, technically, for 4 more hours until midnight. I'm a registered nurse. I work 12-hour shifts in a cardiac unit, and I have, on more than one occasion, had to be the calmest person in a room where someone was dying. I know how to hold a face still. I know how to move through crisis without letting it move through me. I had been doing it my whole life, before I ever set foot in a hospital. I grew up in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. My parents ran a mid-sized landscaping company that my father had built from 2 trucks and a lot of stubbornness into something that genuinely supported our family. My mother kept the books and organized everything and made sure my father's vision had structure around it. They were not bad people. That is the most complicated sentence I know how to write about them. They were not bad people. And yet, my sister Danielle is 3 years younger than me. She has my mother's coloring and my father's confidence and a talent for arriving into any room and immediately becoming the center of it. Growing up, I thought this was just who she was. Magnetic, effortless, a little careless with people who weren't useful to her. It took me until my late 20s to understand that the carelessness wasn't a personality trait. It was something she had been allowed to develop because nobody had ever made her pay for it. When I was 12, Danielle broke my grandmother's ceramic music box. When I was 17, I lost my spot on the varsity volleyball team because my father forgot to submit my registration form. He had remembered Danielle's dance competition entry the same week. When I graduated nursing school, my parents came to the ceremony but left before the reception because Danielle had a dinner thing she wanted them at. I told myself each of these things was an isolated incident. That's what you do when you love people. You find ways to make their behavior make sense. Marcus was the first person who ever looked at the full list of incidents together and said, quietly, "Claire, that's not isolated. That's a pattern." We had gotten engaged 2 years ago, on a Tuesday evening at a park near our apartment. No audience, no performance, just him and me, and the specific kind of quiet that makes you feel like the city is briefly holding its breath for you. We planned the engagement party for the following spring. Small, maybe 40 people, a restaurant we liked in our neighborhood. And we started making noise very early about my 40th birthday. 40 felt significant to me. Not dreadful, I had watched too many people never make it to 40 to be dreadful about it, but significant. A full 4 decades. I told my mother in January, a full 11 months before December, that I wanted to do something real for this one. Dinner, speeches, the people I loved most in one room. She said, "Oh, that's wonderful. We'll make it special." My father said he would handle the toast. Danielle said she'd help with decorations. For a few months, the planning moved along the way it was supposed to. My mother texted me venue options. My father asked about dietary restrictions. Danielle sent me a Pinterest board she had actually made, which felt, at the time, like evidence that she was trying. Then it was September, and my phone rang on a Thursday afternoon between shifts, and everything changed the way things change, when someone has already made a decision before they call to inform you of it. It was my mother. Her voice had that particular brightness she uses when she is about to say something she knows I won't like, and she wants to get through it before I can react. "So you know Danielle has been talking about that trip," she said. I stood in the hospital parking lot in my scrubs. The Cancun thing? It's not just Cancun. It's a whole resort week. She found this incredible deal, the private villa package, the excursions, everything. The whole group is going. I already felt it, that slow gravitational pull in my stomach. Okay. The dates work out really well for everyone, she said. The pause before the next part was not long enough. December 14th through the 21st. I counted in my head. My birthday was December 19th. The dinner was the 20th. Mom, I said. I know. She did not sound like someone who knew. She sounded like someone who had already decided the knowing didn't matter. But she already found the deal, and these resort packages, you know how they are. You can't hold them forever. The dinner is the 20th, I said. I booked the restaurant in April. Well? We were thinking, and this is just a thought, maybe you could move it? Even just to the weekend before? The 13th is a Saturday. It would still be close to your actual birthday. I looked at the parking lot. A car was slowly circling for a spot. A seagull was standing on a light post for reasons I couldn't explain, given that we were 40 miles from any body of water. I focused on the seagull because I needed something neutral to look at. I put deposits down, I said. The invitations went out 3 weeks ago. You could just let people know. 200 guests, Mom. She inhaled, and I recognized the inhale, the one that means she's about to reframe my entirely reasonable position as a character flaw. You're being rigid, she said. Danielle has been going through a lot lately. She needs this. I'm turning 40, I said, and I hated how much I sounded like I was asking permission to matter. I planned this almost a year in advance. And it'll still be special, she said. Just 1 week earlier. I told her I would think about it. I said that because I didn't trust what would come out of my mouth if I said what I actually thought. We hung up and I stood in the parking lot for another 4 minutes until a coworker walked past and asked if I was okay, and I said yes, because I always say yes. I told Marcus that night. He listened the way he listens, completely, without interrupting, his eyes doing that thing where you can tell he is filing information rather than just hearing it. She wants you to move a 200-person dinner, he said slowly, because Danielle found a resort deal. A good deal, I said. Not because I believed it, but because I had spent 39 years reflexively defending my family's logic. Marcus looked at me for a moment. How much was the Cancun package? I don't know. She didn't say. He nodded, but not in a satisfied way. In the way that means he has a question he's not ready to ask yet. My father called 3 days later. He didn't ease into it. That was never his style. He opened with, I've been thinking about the birthday situation in the same tone he uses to discuss supply chain issues. It's not a situation, I said. It's my birthday dinner. Danielle already paid, he said. I set down the cup I was holding. She paid for the Cancun trip? Non-refundable deposit, he said, with what I can only describe as manufactured gravity. You know how these resort packages work. I know how my venue deposit works too, Dad. He sighed. It was a long, burdened sigh, the kind designed to make you feel guilty for causing it. Claire, this is the kind of thing families do for each other. We adjust. We're flexible. I have been flexible my entire life, I said, and my voice stayed level even though something in my chest was not. I planned this dinner for 11 months. I am not moving it. A pause. Long enough to be intentional. If you won't be reasonable about this, he said, don't expect us to come and pretend everything's fine. I felt it land. I felt it the way you feel. A door close in a room you're standing in. Are you telling me you won't come to my 40th birthday dinner? I'm telling you, he said carefully, that if you keep choosing conflict over family, there are consequences. I wanted to say a lot of things. I wanted to list every time I had swallowed what I wanted to keep someone else comfortable. I wanted to ask him, plainly, whether he had ever in my lifetime told Danielle she was choosing conflict over family. But in my family, saying those things out loud was considered the problem, not the behavior that caused them. So I said, very quietly, then don't come. And I hung up. I didn't call them back. I didn't send an apologetic text. I went to work. I did my job. I drove home. I sat on the kitchen floor and leaned against the cabinet under the sink for a while, because sometimes that's the only option available. Marcus found me there and didn't say anything. He just sat down next to me on the tile. Then, after a while, tell me about the fund. I turned my head. What? Your grandmother, he said. The trust she set up. Tell me what you know. I had thought about the trust exactly the way you think about something you've accepted without examining. My father's mother, Grandma Evelyn, had died when I was 24. She left a modest house and a small investment account that had been consolidated into what my parents described, with very little specificity, as a family fund. My mother had told me once, breezily, that Evelyn had wanted to leave something for Claire's big moments. A house, a wedding, something meaningful. I had nodded and never asked for paperwork, because asking for paperwork meant I didn't trust them, and not trusting them meant I was being ungrateful, and ungrateful was the worst thing I could be. I know it exists, I told Marcus. My parents manage it. Have you ever seen a statement? I looked at him. No. Have you ever been told an amount? No. He was quiet for a moment. Then, do you have any documentation? Anything with your grandmother's name on it? Anything at all? I dug through an old accordion file. I kept on the top shelf of our closet, the kind of file you accumulate in your 20s and never fully organize. There was a copy of Evelyn's death announcement, a letter from an estate attorney with some language I hadn't understood at the time and hadn't thought to revisit. A birthday card from Evelyn when I was 21 with $200 in it and a note in her slightly shaky handwriting. For you, not for sharing. Don't let them talk you out of what's yours. I had read that line 100 times over the years. I had always thought she meant advice. Marcus read the estate letter twice, slowly. Then he took a photo of it on his phone. He was careful over the next several weeks. He didn't make accusations. He didn't storm in with dramatic confrontations. He is a forensic accountant, which means he has been trained to find things that have been made not to be found, and he does it without showing any external sign that he is doing it. He asked me for every document I had from my parents that had any financial connection. He filed a few public records requests. He made calls to numbers listed on the estate paperwork, introducing himself politely, asking questions in the tone of someone who was merely curious. He tracked the trust structure through the LLC my parents used for the landscaping company, which, it turned out, was also where they had chosen to house certain family assets. He came to me on a Wednesday night with his laptop. I found the account, he said. My hands went cold. Evelyn's trust? The remnants of it. He turned the screen toward me. What was left was not much. The account had held, at its peak, approximately $94,000. That was the number the estate letter referenced. What remained was $19,000. I stared at it. Where did the rest go? Marcus pulled up a series of transaction records. Over 4 years, the account had been drawn down in portions. Some distributions I could trace to home repairs, things that could plausibly be argued as family expenses, but there was one transfer that couldn't be argued as anything except what it was. $41,000. Recipient. An account in Danielle's name. Date. 14 months ago. Right around the time Danielle had bought her downtown condo, which she had announced at a family dinner as something she'd figured out, without ever specifying how. I sat with it for a while. The number. The date. The clean, clinical way a bank document can tell you something that should be impossible. Does she know it came from my account? I asked. Marcus had found the answer to that too. He had cross-referenced the dates against a chain of emails. Emails he had access to because my mother had accidentally included him on a family thread 8 months ago when she hit reply all, and he had kept his access quiet, because Marcus does not discard information he might need. In one of those emails, my mother had written to my father, Danielle needs the down payment by Friday. Use Claire's fund. She never checks it. She never checks it. I read the line 4 times. 5. I kept waiting for it to mean something different. I met Danielle for lunch the following Sunday, not at my parents' house, not somewhere she could retreat to familiar walls. A Thai place in Midtown, her suggestion, public enough that neither of us could perform too dramatically. She ordered a green curry and talked for 7 minutes about a coworker she disliked, before I set down my water glass and said, Did you know about Evelyn's trust? She blinked. Something moved behind her eyes, brief and specific. Then she shrugged. The family fund? Kind of? Why? $41,000 was transferred to your account from that fund 14 months ago, I said. She picked up her fork. I don't know what you're talking about, Danielle. My voice was quiet. Not angry, something past angry. Something that happens when you're tired enough that anger starts to feel like too much effort. I have the transaction record. She put the fork down. Her expression shifted into something I recognized from childhood. The look she gets when she's been caught and has to decide quickly whether to deflect or attack. She chose attack. So you're investigating me now? I'm asking you a question. Mom and Dad manage that account, she said. Sharper now. Whatever they do with it is their decision. I didn't ask for anything. The email says, you needed the down payment by Friday. She looked at me. There it was, not shame, not remorse. Something more like the expression of someone annoyed at being made to account for anything at all. You have a good salary, she said. You have, Marcus. You're fine. I was trying to get my life together. With my money? I said. She leaned forward slightly. It's a family fund, Claire. It was left to me, I said, by our grandmother. Specifically, for my life moments. Then why didn't you use it for anything? She said, and the logic landed like she thought it was convincing. It was just sitting there. I looked at her for a long moment. There's a particular grief in realizing that someone you love genuinely does not believe they did anything wrong. It's not dramatic. It's quiet and dull, and it sits somewhere behind your sternum for days. Are you going to Cancun? I asked. She picked her fork back up. I already paid. With what? I said. She didn't answer that. I walked out with my coat and my purse and the cold afternoon air and a very specific clarity that I think is only available to you once you have stopped hoping someone will surprise you. Marcus had already connected us with an attorney who specialized in trust disputes. The paperwork was meticulous. The evidence was clean. The attorney explained, without drama, what had occurred. The fund had been left in my name under my parents' management authority until I requested a distribution, and the transfers made to Danielle and possibly others constituted misappropriation. The phrase she used was unambiguous about what it meant. We prepared a demand letter. We didn't file anything yet. We waited. December 20th arrived cold and clear. The restaurant had warmed itself up for us, string lights along the ceiling, tables arranged in a horseshoe so everyone could see the small stage area where speeches would happen, a photo display along one wall that Marcus had surprised me with, pictures from every decade of my life that he'd sourced from people I loved without my knowing. 212 people came. My colleagues from the cardiac unit, friends from nursing school, some of whom had driven from 2 states away, Marcus's family, warm and loud and wonderful. Cousins from my father's side who had always been kind to me. Neighbors. People who had genuinely shown up. My parents and Danielle arrived together, 40 minutes late, and sat at the table near the front that had their names on small cards. My mother air-kissed my cheek and said the flowers were pretty. My father shook Marcus's hand and said nothing to me. Danielle sat down and immediately checked her phone. I smiled at all 3 of them with the part of my face that was still trained to perform peace in uncomfortable situations. The first hour passed the way I had hoped it might: food, laughter, someone's toddler escaping under a tablecloth, a college friend giving a toast that made the room cry in the good way. I let myself be happy. I had practiced letting myself be happy. Then, around 8:30, my mother leaned across the table and said something to my father in a low voice. He nodded. He stood up. She stood up. Danielle stood up, already pulling on her jacket. People nearby noticed first. Then the noticing spread outward through the room, table by table, the way sound travels. My father looked at me across the centerpiece. We have an early morning, he said loudly. Loud enough for the surrounding tables to catch it. We'll celebrate with you properly another time, my mother added, with a smile that didn't reach anything above her mouth. Don't take it personally. And then the 3 of them walked toward the exit together, in a row. Deliberate enough that no one in the room could mistake it for anything, except exactly what it was. I watched them go. I kept my face still. My coworker, Patrice, sitting 2 seats away, reached under the table and put her hand over mine briefly, and I understood that she was doing it because she could see something I was trying not to show. The room hummed back to conversation, but gingerly, the way a crowd recovers from something it witnessed and doesn't have language for yet. People were kind. They were carefully, almost studiously, kind. That's when Marcus stood up. He didn't make a production of it. He stood the way you stand when you've decided something, reached for the microphone that had been sitting on the edge of the stage, and turned to face the room. He didn't start with a joke. He didn't thank anyone for being there. He said, "I need to tell you all something, because I think you deserve to understand what just happened." The room went quiet in layers, table by table, fork by fork. "You just watched Claire's parents and her sister walk out of her 40th birthday dinner," he said. His voice was completely level. It was the most frightening kind of calm, the kind that doesn't need to perform. And I want to tell you why. Because Claire has been keeping this to herself for a long time, and I'm done watching her carry it alone. My throat tightened. I looked at the tablecloth. Claire had a trust fund, he said, set up by her grandmother specifically for her major life moments. A house, a wedding. Her grandmother made that very clear in writing. He paused. Over the past several years, while Claire never asked to see a statement because she trusted her parents to manage it honestly, that fund was drawn down. The room was still. Fully, completely still. 3 weeks ago, he continued, I found documentation of a transfer of $41,000 from that fund to Claire's sister's account, 14 months ago, for a condo down payment. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper, a single page, printed clean, and held it up briefly. This is the transaction record. This is the amount. This is the date. He didn't wave it. He didn't perform. He just held it long enough for the people at the nearest tables to see it was real. I also found an email, he said, from Claire's mother to Claire's father. A brief pause. It says, use Claire's fund. She never checks it. Someone at the table nearest the stage let out a sound that was not quite a word. A chair shifted. I heard my aunt, 3 tables back, say something very soft to her husband. Marcus lowered the paper. He looked at me, and his eyes were the specific steady. That means, I'm here. All the way. Don't look away. Claire didn't beg them to stay, he said. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't ask anyone to feel sorry for her. That's not who she is. He turned back to the room. But they walked out of her 40th birthday dinner tonight because she refused to move this celebration for her sister's vacation. And the reason they needed her to move it, and the reason they've been applying that pressure for months, is that they did not want to sit in a room where people who love Claire might start asking questions they couldn't answer. I felt my eyes fill. I pressed my fingers against them, annoyed at myself, the way I always am when I cry like it's a system failure rather than a human response. Marcus waited for the room to settle back into stillness. Then he said, a little softer, she's been the person who adjusted, who was flexible, who didn't make it a thing, for 39 years. He looked at me. Happy birthday, Claire. You don't have to adjust anymore. The room held for one more second, and then it broke not into chaos but into something warmer and more complicated, the sound of 200 people processing something difficult and choosing, together, to respond with something like love. People stood. Not everyone, not at once, but enough. Patrice was on her feet before I even registered what was happening. Marcus's mother crossed the room in about 4 steps and put both arms around me without saying a word. I cried. I didn't try to stop it. I cried in the middle of my 40th birthday dinner surrounded by people who had now seen the thing I had spent decades making invisible. And for the first time in my life, being seen didn't feel like danger. The morning after, Marcus sent the demand letter. We were at the hotel, we had stayed overnight, as planned, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed in the white robe, with the terrible coffee from the room machine and the winter light coming through the curtains. And he said it's sent without looking up from his laptop, and I nodded and drank the terrible coffee, and felt something in my chest very slowly begin to unknot. My parents called that afternoon. My mother left a voicemail that was 6 minutes long and cycled through wounded, then furious, then a very specific register of guilt. I recognized from childhood the one that sounds like grief, but functions like a weapon. How could you let him do that? In front of everyone? We are your parents. My father texted 2 sentences. You made your choice. Don't call us when you need something. Danielle sent a string of texts that started with, "Are you serious?" and escalated from there. I read all of it. I didn't respond to any of it. Not because I was making a statement, but because I had genuinely run out of the specific energy that responding to them had always required. It's a finite resource. I had been spending it my whole life. and Marcus had finally helped me see the ledger. The legal process was not fast or cinematic. It was slow and paper-heavy and full of language that is specifically designed to be boring. But the paper trail was clean. The estate documents were clear. The attorney's demand was specific. My parents, faced with documentation they could not explain away, hired their own attorney. There were 3 months of back and forth that I mostly let Marcus and our lawyer handle because I had a job to do and patients who needed me to show up fully, and I was not willing to let my family take that from me too. In the end, they agreed to a restitution arrangement. The remaining $19,000 in the trust came to me. Danielle agreed to a repayment schedule for the $41,000, structured through the attorney's office so that no one had to be in a room together. The fund was formally closed, and the management authority my parents had held was permanently terminated. I'm not going to tell you that my family came around. I'm not going to tell you about a tearful phone call where my mother said she finally understood, because that call hasn't happened, and I've stopped waiting for it. What I will tell you is that my father's sister, my Aunt Roberta, who was at the dinner and saw everything, called me in February, about 2 months after that night, and said, very simply, "I want you to know I believe you." And I'm sorry it took me this long to say that out loud. I held the phone for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you. That means more than you know." She said, "Evelyn would have wanted someone to say it." I think about that sometimes. My grandmother with her spotted hands and her shaky handwriting, leaving me a note in a birthday card. "Don't let them talk you out of what's yours." I used to think she meant things like opportunities or confidence, or the right to take up space in a conversation. I understand now that she knew, in the specific way that people who watch families for a long time come to know things, that there would be something more literal to protect. I turned 40. That's what this story is actually about, underneath all of it. I turned 40 in a room full of people who drove from 2 states away and cried at a toast and squeezed my hand under a tablecloth. My husband stood up in front of all of them and told the truth out loud because I had spent a lifetime being too well trained to do it myself, and the relief of hearing it said by someone else was the kind of thing you cannot manufacture or plan for. It just arrives, sudden and physical, like the first breath after being underwater. Some people, when they hear this story, ask if I regret not fighting sooner. If I wish I had demanded to see the statements years ago, I understand why they ask. But here is what I know. I couldn't have done it earlier. I needed to become the version of myself who understood that asking for proof is not the same as being accusatory, that expecting honesty is not the same as causing conflict, that when someone in your life tells you that your boundaries are selfishness, the appropriate response is not to shrink the boundary. It's to look very carefully at who benefits from you making yourself smaller. My grandmother knew that. She tried to tell me in a birthday card when I was 21. It just took me until 40 to fully read it. Marcus and I are looking at houses now. It turns out $19,000 plus a restitution schedule plus 2 people who both have jobs and no longer spend emotional bandwidth managing other people's feelings is actually a decent foundation. We went to see a place last Saturday with a yard and a room I said I wanted to use for painting, even though I haven't painted since college, and Marcus said, "Then you'll paint." Like it was the most obvious and achievable thing in the world. I'm learning to let it be that simple. I'm learning that the life I have now, the one where someone is in my corner all the way, the one where I don't rearrange myself to fit into rooms that were never actually made for me, is not a consolation prize. It's the thing my grandmother was trying to make sure I had access to all along. The empty chairs at the front of the dinner table didn't ruin my 40th birthday. My parents thought they would. They thought leaving loudly, in front of everyone, would finally teach me what they'd been trying to teach me for 39 years, that I was not the priority, that adjusting was my function, that without their approval, the occasion would collapse. What they taught me instead was simpler and more useful than anything they intended. You can have the most important night of your life, while the people who were supposed to love you best are halfway to the parking lot. You can let the empty chairs be empty. You can turn back to the room, and the lights, and the 212 people who stayed, and you can let that be enough. It is more than enough. It always was.